Okay, great. Good afternoon, or good whenever you are watching this. This is Two on One, a weekly talk show in which myself, the Reverend Arthur Stewart, and the Reverend Stephanie Kendall speak to a one about the pop culture topic of their choice. Today, we are joined by Jamie Plunkett, but before we get there, I just want to point out that we were finishing a story from before we went live. What I said to them was the pink sweaters, the pink candle rather, is for ugly sweaters.
Yeah, but the pink candle, Arthur, is for joy.
No, that's the point. Ugly sweaters aren't a theological thing.
I know, but I thought you weren't even really an Advent person.
No, I love Advent, especially when I'm rocking my liturgical purple stole from Jeff One Row Designs.
Ah, that's right. Advent is just 6 weeks away, friends. Can you even believe it? It's the perfect time to order new liturgical textiles from Jeff One Row Designs.
And if you haven't guessed by now, 2-on-1 is sponsored by Jeff One Row Designs, which is celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary.
Amazing. And the creative team at Jeff One Row Designs handcrafts liturgical textiles. Their processional banners and seasonal banners grace sanctuaries across the country. I don't know if you've seen them, but I notice them when I watch other people's worship experiences. And their frontals and paraments adorn altars and lecterns in churches of all sizes, even your digital altars.
And clergy just like me love their pastor stoles, deacon stoles, chasubles, copes, and other vestments.
And Jeff One Row Designs is also proud to include Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Methodists, ELCA Lutherans, the United Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, Unitarian and Roman Catholic, all faithful amongst their clients. Interfaith and non-denominational clergy also love their inclusivity of their designs.
Wow, you said non-denominational this week. I'm proud of you.
I did it!
Whether you are shopping for the smallest altar accessory or you're reevaluating your entire collection of vestments and paraments, Jeff One Row Designs would be honored to work with you to create or find something perfect for you.
So friends, it is October. It is Clergy Appreciation Month. Like we said, Advent is just around the corner. So visit jeffonerow.com for a catalog of stoles or vestments, paraments, and banners, along with ordering information and customization possibilities, which is one of my very favorite things that Jeff does. As someone who is 5'2", I need stoles that are shorter. Mm-hmm. So use the and we have a special promo code, Arthur. Like, what a cool thing to have. What? So if you go to jeffonerow.com, that's WUNROW.com, and use the code 2on1, you get 15% off your next stole or stoles. So, which is just incredible. So make sure you go after this interview to jeffonerow.com because Advent is coming, so make it extraordinary. Visit jeffonerow.com for your next order. And we are so grateful to Jeff One Row Designs and his team for being our lead sponsor.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm glad we did that together. Let's bring in our guest, the Reverend Jamie Plunkett. I'm going to let him in from the waiting room and lock the meeting.
Ooh.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend Jamie Plunkett.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, I really wish we had, that da-na-na, da-na-na. I mean, we don't have enough money for the copyright to play that music, but there's my little song to intro of the West Wing.
How's it going?
So, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation on the West Wing. I know that when we started 2-on-1, you were one of the first people that were like, dibs.
Yes.
On West Wing, because I will also name, friends, that so many of you reached out and they were like, I'm a West Wing fan. Can you? And I was like, oh, friends, we're going to have to do another season of West Wing, but our first conversation has been promised to Jamie, who has been a wonderful supporter of 2-on-1 since the beginning. So thank you for that. And welcome to 2-on-1 officially.
So
this is really cool. You guys have put together such an incredible project that combines beautiful topics of culture and faith and just pop culture and everything. And it's really cool to see all of the varieties of perspectives that have come from you two and your conversations with just an incredible group of people so far. So I'm honored to be a part of this today.
Oh, Jamie, you're one of my best friends, and I'm really not used to you being nice to me, especially.
I was like, think more about this.
Really tough to be kind for an hour to each other, but we'll
okay. See. So, who are you? What do you do?
My name is Reverend Jamie Plunkett. I am the Minister of Youth and Families at University Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. I also do some blogging and journalism stuff on the side around TCU athletics, which makes it really convenient that I work right across the street from the school. You can follow me on Twitter at Frog Preacher, also on Instagram at Frog Preacher. And yeah, I love working with youth, though. That's the passion and the job, which is really fun to have both things be the same thing. And I've been here for about 2.5 years.
Wow, it's been that long.
Family, kids, dogs, all the things,
Yeah, we need to talk about your dogs like when
Okay.
we're off camera, because I'm super excited about those.
They are good. We have 210 pounds of dog in our house and about 65 pounds of child. So it's the right ratio, trust me.
It's a good ratio.
Weird that you have those figures. Just okay. So let's talk about The West Wing. For those of you who are not familiar with this show, it ran for 7 seasons on NBC it was like basically late 90s into the 2000s. Is that
1999 to 2007.
Thank you very much.
It went through the end of Clinton into Bush W.
It follows the Mad Camp Zany adventures. Just kidding. It follows the Bartlett administration. The president, Jeb Bartlett, played by Martin Sheen, and his people working in the West Wing. 7 years, the timeline diverges after Nixon. I think that's just relevant in that because the show does not address Ford, Carter, Reagan, or HW or Clinton. So it's a bit of a different world. Done by Aaron Sorkin, most famous for the walk and talks. I suggested that we just all use our phones and like do the walkies, like we're all just walking the whole time, but that was shot down. That's The West Wing.
Jamie, talk to us a little bit about your relationship to the West Wing.
So I watched The West Wing for the first time. I believe my senior year of college. I was starting to watch The West Wing. That was right after it had run. And so I had some of the DVDs. I started going through season 1 and season 2. Netflix obviously is such a blessing because the whole series is on there. And I've probably now seen West Wing through all 7 seasons, probably at least 22 times, somewhere around there. Like, it is the show that is on in the background when I'm working around the house. It was the show that was on in the background when I was studying in seminary. It is the show that I turn on when I want to turn something on. And
both of your children were born while CJ Craig did The Jackal.
It's true.
Yep.
It's true. It's a beautiful song. I'm losing words because of how wonderful The Jackal is right now. But I do love The West Wing. I think it provides us with some unique things that are almost overlooked today, especially in our current climate, where you have a Democratic president who is a faithful Catholic. And there's this really beautiful narrative throughout the whole series about Jed Bartlett's faithfulness and devotion to his Catholicism, and also the responsibilities of the presidency of the United States, and how sometimes those things are incredibly aligned, and how sometimes he really has these deep moral, ethical struggles that he has to work through. And you see it all on screen, and it's really just a beautiful portrayal of kind of the complexities of that office and the complexities of being a person of faith who is involved in politics. And so I really have found it intriguing. Sorkin obviously does an incredible job writing the show for the first 4 seasons. The folks that picked up after him, Tommy Shammy and a couple others, really carried the water well for seasons 5, 6, and 7. But yeah, just all of the intricacies of the show, the faith elements, the politics, just the great debates that we see, the way that characters are set up to be in conversation with each other, the level of civility in it is just all really brilliant, especially looking back on it now.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. Yeah, Arthur, what's your relationship to West Wing?
I think I've seen it entirely. I love it. Please don't get me wrong. There's Aaron Sorkin is a great writer, and there's times where I'm like, oh, okay, we're doing a catechesis right now. I think about with Leo McGarry, when he is outed as an alcoholic in season 1, or there's the threat of it, and one person's like, why don't you just have one drink? Like, that's the same as like, who is the progenitor of humanity? I believe in God the creator. Anyways, sorry, neither here nor there. I loved the show. My sister and I used to watch it together when she was home, and it has good memories for me. I also love Alan Alda, and yeah, he's in the last two seasons. Was there a writer's strike that prolonged?
1.5. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, Arthur, you make a really good point, though. Something that Sorkin does a lot throughout the show, and in other shows that he does as well, Newsroom being one of them, is he has this really great way of writing storylines in that are kind of basic foundational academic stuff for viewers that they might not even know that they're learning, but they're learning. You see it all the time in the walk and talks that Josh and Donna have, teaching about policy and kind of putting two sides to the argument together as they're just debating about, you know, why are we bailing out Mexico is a really big one, or why are we not giving money back after the surplus? Why I want my money back is something that Donna says 3 or 4 times in an episode. But what it's doing is it's really just teaching people, but it's also really entertaining television.
So I want to talk on that for a bit, because all 3 of us are ministers in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, which famously, at least within our own denomination, says no creed but Christ. And we're as I've had to express it, we're non-creedal. It doesn't mean we're anti-creedal. And some people understand no creed but Christ to be anti-creedal. And the whole point of creeds was, what is it that we believe anyhow? I guess I wanted to ask this because, you know, Sorkin creates catechesis. He creates these things of like, here's how you learn what we're doing. Here's how you learn why bailouts do or don't work. And there's both sides, and there's this and that. It reminds me of a pastor's class or a new member class. Do we lose something as, I'm just going to put it on the table because I hate asking questions when I'm trying to work around my own opinion. I think we lose something by not having some sense of definition. Not that we have to have the same understanding of presence at the table or what baptism does or doesn't do, but without any starting point, I feel like we lose people. Has that been your experience, or how do you address that?
You know, I think you're onto something. I think for a long time, the kind of theological fluidity of our denomination and the ability to be independent thinkers does hurt us in some ways, because there comes a point in the conversation where you're just not going to get together on something. And yes, the table is incredibly unifying for us. And yes, you know, we can set aside some of our differences to really rally around the call that Jesus has for our congregations and for our communities of faith and for our denomination. But I think we also really easily fall into that trap of saying, okay, we know that we have a lot of diversity of thought. And so how are we going to appeal to people all across this spectrum? You know, when you start to try and be all things to all people, you start to not be a whole lot to anyone.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that.
Well, and in that, you know, kind of call to diversity, and, you know, that it's one of the things that I really appreciate about West Wing. So I started watching West Wing. Thanks for asking, you two. I started watching West Wing only 2 years ago. In 2019, I started on January 20th because it felt like a really good day to engage in some political drama. And as someone who has always wanted to go into politics, everyone was like, I can't believe you haven't seen this. And so I was like, ugh. And I will admit, some of it does not age well. There is some sexism and some lack of racial diversity and there's Mandy.
No.
We're going to come to that in just a minute.
Put that sign down.
I have an opinion. We all have opinions on Mandy. So for me, though, it's one of the things that I found lacking, that I wanted more diversity. I wanted, there was some diverse, you know, the diverse thinking. I really appreciated how Bartlett was a leader that wanted people around him to tell him no sometimes, right? Like, I think that that's something that good leadership needs and should expect, and should be a requirement of the communities that we bring around. So one of my questions was like, how do we as, faith leaders continue that narrative of keeping not just yes people around us, especially more progressive churches, right? And so because it's not like none of us have an agenda. Every one of us has an agenda of our own theological understanding of how churches should run and things. But so that we don't run roughshod over a community with that agenda, it's important that we keep people around us that say, hey, pastor, not this time, or, things like that. And so I'm wondering if either of you have an opinion of I'm sure you have an opinion, but how this show models that well, and the spaces that it leaves for even more, right? Because we're talking about the fact that sometimes diversity can be diversity of thought can be overwhelming if you're trying to kind of narrow a definition down, but that isn't always the hegemonic understanding of those definitions is often dominated by white men. And that is modeled in the West Wing. And yet some of the most kind of faithful and poignant moments of that show are when Charlie says no, or CJ says no, and pushes back and says, CJ says, but what about the women? They're being summarily executed. We'll get to Mandy in a moment. And so I guess my question to you all is, how do we hold that intention of making sure that we are both diverse in people and thought, and yet keep that ball moving?
We experience this a lot at UCC because we are such a large congregation, and we do have people who really fall kind of all along the spectrum of theological thinking, of political thinking, of all of that. I think the thing that really kind of is the engine that keeps us going is our sense of unity around the communion table, and this sense of we are all created with unique gifts and unique skills and unique ways to contribute to the work that God is calling us to do as a community of faith. And so our focus then is, what is our call as a community of faith, and how do we engage our larger population around that calling? And so that really does lead to some beautiful conversations, some faithful, hard conversations about what that work looks like, where that work begins, who is involved, and how. And it's never perfect, right? But it is faithful, I think, and good in the long run. And there are, those moments in those spaces where it feels like maybe things aren't going to go the way that we hope because of our own personal agenda or whatever it might be. But then that's when we're encouraged by the people around us who are going to say no, to take a step back and to remember that larger calling. And I think it's a really nice reminder too, that if we are serving a God who always agrees with us, or is always saying yes to us, then maybe we have created God in our image instead of the other way around. And so there's that real opportunity to challenge ourselves to say, what is God speaking to me? And what is God speaking to this community of faith?
Arthur?
Okay, so those of you playing at home, mark off the 1 Corinthians square on your bingo sheet. I'm doing a deep study of 1 Corinthians, have been all year. There's a lot happening with that kind of idea, and it's the table is incomplete without the fullness of the community and the diversity in it. A lot has been said in building a multi-ethnic church, in that it's not enough to just have a person of color on staff at a primarily white church or predominantly white institution. There has to be fundamental change in order to let the whatever the minority may be fully inhabit the space, so to speak. Dealing with a church that is open and affirming, and thank you all for being open and affirming, but still living into that identity. Diversity, it's like when Charlie was hired, coming back to West Wing, because I remember that episode very much, because Martin Sheen said, is it bad optics, or will it be talked about to have a young black man as the personal valet to the president? What should I do? And I believe they told him, you're overthinking this.
Are you going to pay him a fair wage? Are you going to treat him with dignity in the workplace?
I'm an old black man, and I opened the door for the president.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess there's that balance of we have to cultivate and pursue diversity. Like it is okay to say we need diverse thinking and diverse doing, but the line between embracing and honoring diversity and tokenism is so razor thin, and so has to be watched. I just see that.
Well, yeah, it's part of our white accountability. The three of us having a conversation about race in our whiteness. It's also, I think, for those of you that watched this last week, there was a live stage reading of Hartsfield Landing, which is a season 3 episode. And one of my favorite pieces of that episode, I have a couple, but one of my favorite pieces is, so Bartlett is playing chess on several different boards. And he tells them, to look at the whole board. And I think that that's part of the church leadership, is to look at the whole board, but that it's also relational, right? That each piece also moves in relationship to each other. And that even sometimes when it looks like it's in opposition to the end goal, it's actually in a strategic movement to look at the whole board. And I think that that's a really faithful message for us at this time to say, for those of us as we're calling everyone to vote, right? We have an election in 13 days. Look at the whole board, right? Like, who are you voting for? You're voting for the whole board. You're not necessarily voting for your next move. And I think that for churches, specifically church leaders, it is part of our call to model a way in which relationship, stewardship, all of that looks at the whole board rather than looks for the next move.
Because you will lose a game of chess if you're only playing the next move and if you're only reacting.
Yeah. But are we supposed to look at, but is it our job to look at the whole board? Because I think part of that question comes back to like, is it our job to move the whole board? Is it God's job to to look at the whole board? Like, what is the relationship to the board and to the chessboard, as it is in this metaphor, to religious leadership and to faith development and growth?
Yeah, I think, in that episode of Hartsfield Landing, like you mentioned, there are a couple different chessboards. There's the chessboard with Bartlett and with Toby Ziegler. And then there's the chessboard with President Bartlett and
Your
Rob
first
Lowe's
office,
character.
class act.
Right, thank you. But Rob Lowe's character, who is, and in this scene, Rob Lowe is really trying to figure out what President Bartlett's overall strategy is. And so at the risk of pushing a metaphor
Too far.
that may not really exist, but I really kind of think of the church as sitting in Rob Lowe's chair and saying, we are trying to figure out what the whole board even looks like. And we're in the mid, we have this dynamic relationship, pieces are moving, we're doing our part, God is doing God's part. And we maybe don't have the whole picture yet, but we still know that we have an integral role. And we do know that when the time is right, God is going to say, are you ready to come inside? Are you ready to come in and see this next part of the board? Are you ready to see this next part of the work that we have to do together? Just like President Bartlett invites him in and says, see the whole board. Are you ready to come inside? And Rob Lowe realizes that there's a strategy on the surface that is actually counter to the actual strategy that President Bartlett is working at, which is he's not going to sell some of these very expensive weapons to, I believe it's Taiwan. I believe it's Taiwan. Because they know that that's a quarter of Taiwan's defense.
You watching? Let us know if it's Taiwan.
Yeah, and so like there's this underlying strategy that's maybe not visible, but is Rob has a significant part in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's attack the real question at hand. So, first of all, I think it is a well-known, at least for many, let me rephrase this. In my experience, most West Wing fans don't love the character of Mandy.
I want to note for the record, I think she's perfect for the 90s in which it was set. She was obnoxious, but everybody was obnoxious on TV then, and I like her.
that's great. I like that you like her. I want to pose to the group, why don't we like Mandy?
I think
I was like, Arthur, you look like you have something to say as the one person that likes Mandy.
Okay, so Mandy was on the wrong show. She was wacky advertising, or not advertising, marketing expert living in a loft with her roommate as they were trying to deal with her ex. Like, Mandy was on the wrong show. And I think that's incongruous, and I think it just sticks out, and that's why people don't like her. But also, she's a woman who talks too much.
I think it's sexism.
Yeah,
but
and I mean, no, please don't get me wrong. Please don't get me wrong. Yes, it's sexism. It's ingrained cultural misogyny. I don't think women. You know, you guys know me well enough to know that that's okay. I'm done.
As someone who does not care for Mandy on the show, I agree with Arthur's thought that I think she's on the wrong show. I think that, and Sorkin has admitted this too. He wrote Mandy to be Josh Lyman's love interest, and there was such a dynamic chemistry between Josh and Donna, Janelle Maloney's character, early on, that everybody who was watching the show wanted that to flourish, and it just felt like Mandy got in the way. And also, yeah, I do think there's some maybe deep-seated misogyny that comes along with a woman who doesn't feel like she fits, and does talk a lot and pushes, argues, and
like literally works on the sidewalk.
Screams at a person. I do love that scene though. That's my favorite Mandy scene, is where she runs her BMW up onto the sidewalk and is screaming at this guy in public, because she's brilliant in that scene. She's very smart in that scene. But I also do think that Sorkin realized pretty early on that people didn't care for her, and so he started to write her that way. I think, with like the memo that leaks, and then, I mean, obviously she just disappears after season 1 altogether.
Hi, Mandy.
Bye. She got another job, I guess. But I think he realized early on that she wasn't a hit character that people were in love with, and I wonder if that maybe influenced his writing a little bit too.
Maybe, and because it sets up very clearly who the villain is in this. It's anybody against this administration, right? The villain is, because this is a Democratic administration, the villain, and they say it in 17 People when they're trying to write the address, and they say, who are we making fun of? Republicans, and it's that whole thing, that there's that dynamic. And Mandy didn't play the game. Mandy was bipartisan in a way that, she wrote memos against the opposition. She didn't fit into a mold of which I think where the country was at that time as well, like we were gearing up again for an election. We were, Democrats were trying to keep all sorts of branches of the government, and we were going towards the Bush years, as we all know. And so I think that Mandy complicated things, and we don't, as a society, hold well that type of turbulence. That bipartisan turbulence doesn't always sit well with those of us doing the work that we feel we're really called to, right? Because if anything that you take from the West Wing is that these people are passionate about citizenry. They're passionate about coming together and working for the people. And I think that that's really modeled well when they bring in Ainsley Hayes, who is, I think, one of the best characters that on the show, that then obviously we know it's a contract thing why she didn't stay around and they lost her, but there's passion there. And I think for Mandy is an outspoken, brazen woman who socially we don't know how to deal with those types of women anyways, speaking from very personal experience. And she went against the love interest that was organic out of Josh and Donna. And I think that really, that just played against it. So.
Yeah, Donna was supposed to be like Ginger. She was supposed to be this kind of really background character who had a few lines every couple episodes. But I mean, we see from the very first episode that interaction where she brings Josh Lyman a cup of coffee. Like there was something there. And so she starts to get the time that was probably dedicated to Mandy early on.
Well, and why not go with Sparks? And I mean, like from the production side, that makes sense. the most one of the most despised characters, and really the last of the 90s disappearances, because there was that daughter on Family Matters who just went to her room and never came back.
She's still there.
She's still there. She's
Still in her room.
Skeleton. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a Cosby child who disappeared. I don't know. I feel like Mandy didn't get justice. I feel like Mandy didn't get a chance to be redeemed. Where's her presidential pardon at the end of the series?
Okay, so what do we do with the Mandys of our church, though, that don't fit in? Because we see them leaving, right? We see them, we are in those seasons of season 2, where all of a sudden those Mandys, sometimes when a church turns the corner from season 1 to season 2, you're going to lose the Mandys. Does that matter for church community? Or what does that say for church community?
This is unorthodox and I apologize. I will be back in 1 minute. I have to deal with something.
Sure.
I think that's an interesting question. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning about can the church be all things to all people? I don't think that any singular congregation can be all things to all people. And so there are going to be people who kind of, even in the midst of congregations where there is deep, difficult conversation because people really, truly, faithfully think differently about issues, there are going to be people who are outspoken in a way that feels like they are written for the wrong church, right? Like kind of like Arthur was saying, Mandy feels like she was written for the wrong show. There are going to be people who feel like maybe this just isn't where you're being fed. And so I think as a church, my struggle is, are we doing people a disservice by trying to change who we are so that they feel more comfortable being a part of the conversation, versus should we do a better job of encouraging people to find a space where they fit? There are in our denomination an incredible variety of congregations. In Fort Worth, we have 5 or 6 different disciples churches that are vastly different from one another. I think we can do a really good job of saying, we love you, we care for you. Let's find a space where you really can be authentically you, versus this friction that isn't productive and is holding people back.
Amen. I'm with you. I mean, that's exactly, I think.
But it's a hard conversation, right? Because we want to be like, we want to brand ourselves as inclusive and all are welcome and we love everyone. But then
the competitiveness of churches, right? I mean, like it's a membership grab. It's when we start to focus too much on how many people we have in the pews rather than how many people know Jesus.
And I'll compliment the churches in Dallas too, that literally would be in conversation with each other and say, hey, I'm sending this family your way because we feel like they're looking for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, but yes, it's the membership grad. It's flock stealing. It's proselytization. What does it mean to have a bigger tent? Because I think that's part of the question too. The Bartlett administration, I mean, it becomes let Bartlett be Bartlett at Hartsford Landing.
Which, side note, I have a Let Bartlett be Bartlett t-shirt. Jamie's even seen it, I believe, like in person. I like put up my West Wing poster when I went and saw West Wing Weekly live. Cannot find my Let Bartlett be Bartlett shirt. So but just for the sake of it, I am wearing Josh and Donna earrings.
Heck yes. Okay.
So there's my Call Congress shirt, because be in conversation with your leadership, friends. So there's my plug. Keep going.
Well, yeah. So the bigger tent, I mean, within that, it's the CCDOC, the disciples have in the last, should we say the last 15 years, and Spiff, please feel free to stop me with this question if this is not something we want to cover in the show. We've seen a departure of more theologically conservative congregations in the last 15 years over a variety of issues, particularly after 2013 by saying gays are people, and then in 2019 by insisting trans people are also people. I know that's an overgeneralization. What do we, and there's theological concerns, and really there's always this no creed but Christ, and we're by association, not by. how do we create a bigger tent intercongregationally? Or are we supposed to do that? Or should we just bless people and let them go?
I think it's both and.
Okay.
I think I think if we are truly, the bigger the tent, the less threatened we are that our own portion of the tent is not enough. And so, that everyone is covered under this umbrella of Christ, right? Like if we're doing work, right? So I serve a church that identifies as queer, womanist, and multicultural, multilingual. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to process for some certain people. And we had a big exodus, and we still pray for those people. We still hope that they found a church home in which they feel valued. It just wasn't, that's just not where we are, right? And so there's no animosity there. I think for some people, there's a fear of like, we're losing them Christ is losing them, not just the church is losing them, rather than saying, move into this space in which you feel you can kind of journey at a different pace than where we are, right? Like, because there's an expectation that we're all going to end at the same time and in the same space and in the same way, and we're just not. And if we have that expectation, then we're going to lose a lot of people along the way because we're not giving space for them to rest or process or whatever that metaphor we want to go with. But so I think this larger tent understanding is actually something that is a bit more hopeful and inclusive in some ways. And yet, because you see it happen, because you're all under that same tent, it can feel painful and kind of challenging, especially when ego gets involved and when bigger, I don't know. So yeah.
I think big tent spaces give us an opportunity to practice curiosity. I think, again, I am at a larger disciples congregation, and we do consider ourselves a big tent church. And we have to be intentional about asking hard questions and being vulnerable with one another and creating those brave spaces where we can really start to get to the root of our own individuality and our own faith and what that means for us moving forward together. It is hard work. It is a labor, and it doesn't always go well, but it's required, I think, because there's a difference in being all things to all people and being faithfully in relationship with people who think differently. And we cannot be the former, but we can absolutely be the latter of those things. And we should. And even if we're in a smaller church where we are pretty much all theologically aligned, politically aligned, whatever it might be, I think churches of that nature have a responsibility then to reach out, reach across the street, reach across town, to congregations who may be a little bit different, and engage in relationship and conversation and partnership that way. I don't think everything needs to be under one big tent, but I think there do need to be spaces where we can be curious together and spaces where we can retreat and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves as well.
I have to say that I really admire what UCC did in their conversations about gun control last year, or about
a year and a half ago. Yeah,
it was done really well. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, too bad, because here's an important question. Who's the best character?
Why? In the West Wing?
No, just generally. Yes, on the West Wing.
In the three of us.
My love for Josh Lyman knows no bounds.
Why?
He is abrasive. He is act before think. He is kind of like the West Wing's version of the Kool-Aid Man, where he will just absolutely run through a wall, spackle, dust particles, crap is everywhere.
Oh,
and then he takes a look behind him and he's like, oh, I might have made a mistake, right? Like there's this point in season 5 where
China.
a Democratic senator leaves the party because of Josh Lyman. It's this huge dramatic situation. But I also, and so I love just the chaos that is Josh Lyman. I love lemonlyman.com and his interaction with message boards, as someone who spends time on message boards myself.
The internet's gone crazy.
Right.
And I do just want to note for people who don't know, Jamie at one point, for fun, referred to West Virginia as Western Virginia, and has consistently done so now for like 5 years.
Yeah, so like 3 or 4.
Like
I get emails almost monthly from West Virginia fans who tell me that I need to take a geography class because West Virginia became its own state in 1864.
So like you are aware that it is West Virginia, but you just troll people. And so Josh Lyman is a bit of not a troll in a bad way, but he's willing to just, again, act before think and shoot from the hip.
Well, you think you go back to the pilot episode, the major conflict of the first episode of The West Wing involves Josh being on TV with an evangelical pastor, and he pops off at the mouth and says something that he shouldn't say in a public forum. And then the whole rest of the episode is Josh going to get fired? How do we backtrack from this public statement? The first scene that Jed Bartlett has in The West Wing is him walking into this conversation where they're negotiating what's going to happen. And he correctly quotes the first commandment because they're debating what the first commandment is. I am the Lord your God, and you will have no other God but me. A beautiful scene. And so, yeah, Josh, just like from the get-go of the series, has this kind of abrasive, shoot from the hip personality. And at the same time, his character development over the course of 7 seasons is brilliant. With the ending of season 1, spoiler alert, I guess 20 years later.
20 years later.
He's shot and now he's experiencing PTSD, and he and Leo McGarry have this beautiful scene of, a guy fell in a hole and his buddy jumps down. Well, now we're both in here. Yeah, but I've been down here before. I know the way out. This developing relationship with Donna, how he, has it named for him by the president of the United States. I want to be the guy. You want to be the guy that the guy counts on. And so just this character of Josh Lyman of being the one who, as abrasive and, just non-thinking as he can be at times, he wants to be kind of the foundation. He wants to be the bedrock. He wants to be all reliable for people who are in positions of power. And he wants to do that job really well. You see, in his relationship with Amy, I didn't have the best grades. I didn't have the highest IQ. I had to work really hard to get where I am. He resonates with me a lot.
So I'll say that Josh's overall arc, I really appreciate. Josh is not my favorite character, but because I have 2, true to form, Amy Gardner and CJ Craig, who are the 2 best characters. Well, CJ is, in my opinion, the best kind of primary character, and Amy Gardner is the best secondary character, but also I relate to Amy Gardner the most.
Let's say you are Amy Gardner.
Thank you. That's like a really nice compliment.
So you're welcome.
Again, Jamie being nice in public.
I know, it's weird. No, I'm just kidding. I love you. But there's for Josh, though, I will say his overall arc does not resolve in a way that is kind of pretty and tied up, which I really appreciate. He goes through spaces of mental health that he models really well. And I think his character offers opportunity for community support. Like when Josh is going through his PTSD and all of that, right? It's Donna who notices, it's Leo who helps. And that this work, the work that we are called to do, specifically Josh is called to do really big and important, things, can only be done when we are in community, right? Like the community support and help. And that's, I think, one of the bigger things of West Wing for the church, that the church can learn from, is that, yes, it is the Bartlett administration. Yes, it is President Bartlett that kind of, it's that when he walks in, he's like, all right, everyone, we're making chili, and no one cares. And he goes, okay, everyone look down at the floor, and they all look at the seal, and he goes, look back up at me. We're all making chili. And they all then, Yeah, and then they all respond appropriately. So there is that, kind of like he gets to cast that vision, but it's only accessible. That vision only comes to fruition with the help and support and love and all of the things of a large diverse community. And so for me, that's one of the, if you look at West Wing as a whole and you look at the church, like what, the big question that we do this entire conversation for is, what can the church learn from West Wing? One of those things for me very much is that you can't enact the vision that God has set on your heart for your church as a faith leader without community, because it's not going to be faithful or sustainable or what God wants from us, right? God wants us in community and in relationship. And so for me, Josh really models that. CJ is the best character, one, because I think she bucks all those systems that the West Wing continues to hold as problematic, right? It's of all the, she's the only one that speaks up for the women, she and does so consistently. I think that for her, because she deals in facts as the press secretary, there is a real delineated understanding of like how we should and should not work. I think she's a solid one. I think, and it's when there's a lot of gray area for other people. She has a real understanding of all of the black, white, and gray shades that accompany leadership, whether it be faith leadership or federal leadership. So. And Amy just has an agenda and she recklessly pursues it. Arthur, who's your favorite character?
Sam Seaborn.
Sam Seaborn?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Why?
Yeah. I like his obsession with words. Mm-hmm. I like that he is very much in his own head. I've just always, I can't even express why. I just appreciate the almost neurotic passion.
Well, I appreciate, I don't know how much, I'm sure Jamie knows this. I am assuming Arthur maybe knows, but like the political understanding of Rob Lowe and Sam Seaborn are in contrast. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things about Sam Seaborn as a character is that Sorkin wrote so many things to come out of Sam's mouth just to make Rob Lowe say them. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is something there of being willing to go someplace that you are not yet in yourself, to be able to say things that maybe you don't believe, to be able to say things. I mean, he's an actor and he's a character actor, so like I'm gonna name that, but like there's something about words coming out of your mouth that you don't believe that sit differently than the things that we, that we hold true. But when we start to be able to say them, it starts to be able to change how we understand them. And I think that there's something really faithful to that in our call to be relational to those that are different than us.
So that ties into my last question, if I could. Jamie, you earlier mentioned curiosity as a guiding force for both church and we can say the political realm. I'm reading a great book, and I don't think I brought it with me from home. I'm reading like 6 books. It's Power. I can't even remember what it is, but it's talking about basically the economy and how when we cut innovation and we cut research, we cut the ability for the regular people to grow in fields. It's also been said about the current presidential administration that the president lacks any sort of intellectual curiosity. And there's nothing he has said to the contrary to refute that. And this is not actually fine. It is. I wish we had an intellectually curious president. Do you feel like when churches stop being curious, when they stop being open, that's when they start to die? What role does curiosity play in the church? Just talk on that just a little bit, because I really liked what you were saying about it.
Honestly, I think some of the more successful churches are less curious. Because I think for a lot of people, church is a place where we go to be reassured, to feel good, to know that Jesus loves us. And we don't have to ask big questions because God's got all the answers. you know. There are a lot of different brands of Christianity who offer up a list of answers to the big questions that you might have about life.
Bringing us back to catechesis.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk a lot at UCC about 25-cent answers to $100 questions. And so, you know, we know that asking these questions and engaging them seriously is going to be a lot harder than the alternative. But in the end, we truly do believe that the effort put forth to explore those questions well brings us maybe not to an answer, but to a deeper understanding and fuller relationship with God and with each other than it would if we were just signing off on a creed every Sunday. Than it would be if we just said, yeah, you know, God has a plan, right? Everything happens for a reason. Those platitudes that really are actually incredibly harmful. But asking deep, hard questions and exploring them together is, you know, less attractive sometimes to some and more attractive to others. So I don't know that I necessarily have a good answer to your question. I don't know if I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I just think that it really depends on the person, and it depends on the community of faith, because curiosity can be really powerful, or it could feel like it's getting in the way.
Skiff?
I mean, I think that curiosity, for those of us in really, you know, high spaces of privilege, right? Those of us, we are educated, employed white people right now, healthy and all of that, right? Like the three of us just looking at this.
Because of my lighting, I'm so white, I'm almost transparent.
There you go. I think that curiosity can help deconstruct some of the privileges that we need to share and distribute amongst those that we serve and those that we serve with. And so I think that curiosity plays an important role in progress and in resurrection. And yet I think I think that there are two levels of what we kind of deem as successful, right? Are we looking at successful, or, you know, churches being those that make the most money and those that have the most people, or are we, you know, or is impact how we're naming success? And so I think that it's all held, and those are questions of curiosity in and of themselves, right? Like what, you know, the curiosity of what is the church called to do? What do the people of that church need to do it, right? And so I think a continuous curiosity is part of the gospel. And I think that curiosity is also part of the fulcrum of fear that hinges whether or not we can move forward.
Those are both great answers.
I have another question. Can we move? Or Arthur, how do you feel about curiosity?
No, I was legitimately asking that because it's something I've been wrestling with. Like, what does it mean to be curious, and what does it mean to be assured? And both are important, and I think it's more of a spectrum that has to be. Fulcrum is really interesting. I see it as a seesaw, which I believe is on a fulcrum. I do want us to be cognizant of our time today, because we're having a great conversation.
And we could talk West Wing. I legitimately could talk West Wing.
No, we haven't even gotten past season 3 yet, and so Jamie, you're on our list of returning guests. Congratulations.
Hey, here we go. Let's do it.
Well, and before we get to our final question, I do have one question because I think it's pertinent to what's happening right now. And we are in a political climate that I think I just want to ask: how much does church put yourself in the mindset of Bartlett? Season 1 and 2, President Bartlett has been hiding his MS. As faith leaders, how much do we owe to our congregation to be transparent in those types of spaces and those types of truths about ourselves?
So as somebody who got married in a congregation, there's a difference between private and personal. And the moment that clergy begin to recognize that, the better it is for them and the better it is for the church. There is,
Can you nuance how you define those?
I'm sorry?
Can you define or nuance or
Yes.
like can you offer?
Personal is that which relates to Arthur Stewart, not the Reverend Arthur Stewart. Personal might be I'm redoing my kitchen. Personal might be I'm getting married. Personal might be backed my car into a pole, whatever. It's that which does not pertain to the life of the church, because clergy will never fully be part of the congregation they serve. That's part of the sacrifice they make. Private, on the other hand, is that which is not disclosed, and it's okay to have private matters. The child who lives in my house right now, I refer to as the kid. And everyone has respected the fact that I do not say that child's name yet, and I'm not going to until circumstances change. That kid is the kid. I try not to use pronouns, and they're fine with it because that's the allowance in it. If I were $400,000 in debt or $900 million in debt, I would need to disclose that, because that affects the way I do ministry. That is going to change the way I'm available and change the way I may be available in the future. If I don't know. I'm talking too much. What do you guys think?
No, and I think it's complicated. I want to name that this is not a straight answer. This is not an answer that has a clearly defined boundary. I think it's contextual. I think, it's going to change from person to person. I'm just interested in that because so much has been held back in that space for this episode or for this storyline. And I don't know. So yeah, Jamie, go.
Thanks. Yeah. That is a tough question. And I agree with Arthur in the idea that the ministers do need to maintain some sort of autonomy over their private lives. I think that that's really critically important for a minister's mental health, and also for creating space where you're just not a minister sometimes. It is enough of a 24/7 job. There needs to be self-care space where you are not reverend to someone, or you are just in your own place, in your own space, and everyone else just needs to allow that. But I also agree that if it is something that is going to hinder your ability to walk alongside a community of faith well, then there has to come a point where that is no longer private information. I also agree with you, Spiff. I think that it is highly individual, and so the cases are going to be completely different. But there is that standard of saying, is this causing harm to my congregation? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we've got to go. We've got to get into the East Room. We've got to have our press conference. If it's not causing harm to the and that might even, who knows if a minister is even capable of answering that question on their own. And I think we're really getting into a conversation of how are ministers being ministered to? Are you talking to a counselor? Do you have a circle of people who don't see you as reverend, but just as your friend? Is your spouse or partner or family, chosen family, whoever it might be, a space where you can really be open and honest and authentic to your depths, to the core of your depths, so they can walk that walk with you and help you answer that question, because there is so much at risk for the minister and for the congregation if that starts to fester, that it could be really extraordinarily damaging if it's not taken care of.
In the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, final question.
Final question. Yeah, you want to ask?
Travis didn't write our song.
Yeah, Travis wrote our song. So Jamie, what biblical book, person, narrative, or theme are you most reminded of in The West Wing?
So I look at Jed Bartlett's Faith, and this is going to be a longer answer. I love that Aaron Sorkin took Martin Sheen's Catholicism into account when writing Jed Bartlett. That's pretty well known for people who go that deep with The West Wing. Bartlett's Catholicism is Martin Sheen's Catholicism. And so that is written and that is played very authentically by Sheen himself. I think that we see in scripture very frequently this conflict between what God is calling someone to do, or a person's understanding of who God is and what God is up to in the world, versus what the world is asking of that person. And they're put into this space where a choice has to be made. Do I live into who God is calling me to be? Do I live into this other thing? And so we see Jed Bartlett throughout the show really struggle with this identity crisis almost. Take the Sabbath day in season 1, which is all about the weekend that Jed Bartlett has to think about whether he is going to exonerate someone who is about to suffer the death penalty. And he talks to the Pope. He talks to his pastor. Toby Ziegler talks to his rabbi.
The rabbi interrupts him and does a sermon just for Toby.
And so there's that whole episode, and the rabbi and Toby are sitting in their synagogue, and there's a person practicing a song for the next worship service, and the rabbi says, it is all we can do is assume that these writings are the best wisdom of their time, but some of them are just wrong by any modern standard. And so it's this huge conflict of how do we even interpret the scriptures that we have? How do we relate those to the issues of the day? Are they even relevant to the issues of the day? Take the Sabbath day does that. We see that in Shibboleth in season 2, where the Chinese refugees have made this tremendous effort to get to the United States. They're claiming Christianity as kind of their coverage for being refugees. And Bartlett brings one of them to the White House, and he's trying to get them to say the word Shibboleth. And they're having this really dynamic conversation, and the Chinese refugee says, faith can't be shown by any kind of test or answering of questions, but it is this true Shibboleth, right? And then later in the episode, some of the West Wing staffers are asking Bartlett, and they say, well, what would have happened if he hadn't said that word? And Bartlett says, you really think I would have sent them back if they hadn't passed a test? And so it's this faith that compels him to show compassion to people on the margins. 2 Cathedrals, that monologue right after Mrs. Landingham's death, where he is walking down the center aisle of the cathedral all the way up onto the chancel, and he is ranting. What was Josh Lyman? A warning? That's my son, and just this huge faith battle that he has, his own conflict in his relationship with God, and that impacts his decision to run for president again or not. It ends with him putting a cigarette out on the church floor and saying, "You get Hoynes." I get goosebumps every time I hear that scene. But just this whole narrative of God is calling us into one thing, and the world is calling us into something else. And at some point, we have to make a decision about who we are listening to, especially in those moments where those two needs are not aligned with one another. We see that play out throughout the West Wing in Jed Bartlett, Toby Ziegler's own life. Later in the show, we see that play out in Matthew Santos in his campaign. It is a constant theme throughout the West Wing. Are people listening to faith, or are they listening to the world? And that's what I've got.
Arthur, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm gonna say Mandy is Melchizedek. No, maybe Enoch. I'm sorry, that just ruined a really good kind of sermon.
We really should have made Jamie go last. That was a really good time.
No, my honest answer is Ezra and Nehemiah. It's one of my favorite bits is when they're in the rubble of the temple and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you guys, look! It's the Torah. We found it. It was right there, and it sounds different from when you remembered it, but it's the same thing. That's fine." And that's Deuteronomy, the second telling. Sorkin's drama had to present the world as it could be, and it was a finessing. I mean, you skip Reagan, and the Reagan administration, and you see a completely different world. And it's when it goes from this is a Democratic president and a successful economy to here's 9/11 and here's the early Bush years. It's a second telling. It's not what would have happened. It's not what could have happened. It's what still might. And I think when people watched the show during the Obama administration, it's different than when people watched the show during the Trump administration. It would have been different during the Clinton administration or the Romney administration or anything else. So the story has to be reimagined and reinterpreted, but in such a way that it is faithful to what the story really is. And to come back around on the curiosity thing, democracy fails when we stop focusing on the experiment and start focusing on ourselves. And I think Ezra Nehemiah is a realignment, and I think the West Wing is a call to realignment.
I went with my two favorite characters because I was like, how am I going to answer this final question for all of our people? So I went with, I think Amy Gardner is Eve. Eve never underestimates her own understanding of the status quo and her relationship to it. That she comes out and is just like, what she is doing has no relationship to the agenda of Adam or anything like that. That there's a real kind of like, I'm going to go forward. I'm going to do this thing. She's got some kind of singular vision that I really appreciate about Amy. I came on the angel Gabriel for CJ in the Annunciation as that which brings the news forward. The one that is called to share in new and inventive and holy and inspired spaces. Some of this good news, sometimes it's bad news, but I mean, let's be honest, when she was sharing with Mary, or when Mary hears about being pregnant with Jesus, there's a real good, bad sort of space to hold as well. And so,
does that make Danny Colcannon the Virgin Mary?
Possibly. But anyway, so that I went with CJ as the angel Gabriel. I did have Ainsley as Ruth. I had Josh as Jephthah because he keeps putting his foot in his mouth and creating some real problematic situations for a lot of other people that don't necessarily affect him. So that was all of the things that I got this week. I will also say one of my very favorite things is that and I didn't realize it until much later, the church in which they bury Leo, or where they have Leo's funeral service, is the church I got ordained at. In that very spot where they are doing that is First Congregational of Los Angeles, and is my home church, and is the church that ordained me. And so watching it now, I'm just like, especially because that's a really sad scene, and that's like, it's such a heavy moment that it holds weight for me in both the personal and the professional and as a fan.
Well, this has been 2 on 1, the first episode about the West Wing with the Reverend Jamie Plunkett. Jamie is the Minister to Youth and Families at University Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. He is also Frogs of War, one of the contributors, and you can find him on Twitter at Frog Preacher. He's also the co-host of People versus POTUS, presidential trivia podcast.
Now defunct presidential podcast.
Stop plugging other podcasts in the chat.
We made it to Martin Van Buren, right?
3 years between episodes is not inappropriate at all.
We're basically almost done at this point.
There's a lot to research about William Henry Harrison. But James, it's been a pleasure to have you on our show with us. I'm gonna get up our sponsor real fast.
There we go.
Because we are sponsored by Jeff Wunrow Designs. You can go to Jeff Wunrow, WUNROW.com. They're celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. And again, the code 2on1 for 15% off your next stole. And that's the way you tell them that Stephanie and Arthur sent you.
All right, well, friends, Jamie, thank you so much for being on. Getting you on is always it's always a blessing and a treat to talk to you. And now in our small group chat, you were the last one to have to come on 2 on 1. So now you've joined the full club. Next week, friends, it is a week you also won't want to miss. We are talking to the Reverend Dr. Amy Butler about What the Constitution Means to Me, a show that was on Broadway that is now available on Amazon. Watch it. It is incredible. It is by Heidi Schreck. And it's just worth watching anyways. And then Following the election, we have on the Reverend Terry Hord Owens, General Minister and President of the Disciples. And it's going to be a good couple of weeks to come and join us for an hour of conversation. And
it's been a good week too, Jamie.
Yeah.
Please don't.
I'm very thankful that I came on before those two incredibly powerful, brilliant women.
Exactly. And if you are someone who would like to be a guest on 2on1, drop us an email, 2on1project@gmail.com. We've actually been in talks with a few guests because they were like, sure. And we're like, sure. And that's how we roll right now. And it's great. So I am Arthur Stewart, joined, of course, by Stephanie Kendall. Thank you again, Jamie. And we are going to stop the live stream. Goodbye. Be well. Vote.
vote.
Vote.